Hello and welcome to another TLDR UK video. Issues of race are always likely to be controversial, but when a report commissioned by Number 10 produced results suggesting that racism isn't a major issue in the UK, well, that went down about as well as you'd expect. So in this video, we're going to unpack the report, explain who put it together, what it really says, and why some people are so angry and disappointed by the report and the media coverage surrounding it. Speaking of media coverage, if you want to support our independent, unbiased reporting, then be sure to back us on Patreon. In return, you get a whole bunch of perks, like exclusive access to our April live events, early access to videos, behind-the-scenes posts, and the ability to vote on video topics. The link to the Patreon can be found in the description, but if you can't support us financially, then feel free to drop us a subscribe instead. Thanks. So this rather controversial report is the 264-page product of the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. This is a commission that was set up by the government to investigate issues of race and racism in the UK, and ultimately to publish this landmark report. The report, in a move which caught a lot of media attention, claimed that we no longer see a Britain where the system is deliberately rigged against ethnic minorities, adding that a degree of optimism is justified when it comes to race in the UK. In fact, it even goes on to say, too many people in the progressive and anti-racism movements seem reluctant to acknowledge their own past achievements. Okay, so you can probably tell why this report hasn't gone down well, but let's dive a little deeper and see how they reached these conclusions. Let's look at some of the key areas. Employment was a major focus of the report, with the Commission emphasising the significant progress that's been made. The report notes that over the last 50 years, minority groups have seen the pay gap versus their white colleagues contract significantly, with it currently sitting at 2.3%. They also highlight the growing diversity in a number of major professions, such as medicine and law, so much so that they recommend getting rid of unconscious bias training. Despite this, some say that the report cherry-picks data, pointing out the major discrepancy when it comes to unemployment. Back in 2019, 4% of white people were unemployed versus 7% when you combine together all other ethnic groups, a gap which leaps to 10 and 19% respectively for 16 to 24-year-olds, with black African ethnic groups seeing youth unemployment reach 26%. The TUC also highlights the different kinds of jobs that ethnicities generally have, pointing out that black and minority ethnic workers are far more likely to be in low-paid, insecure jobs when compared to their white colleagues. The GMB union also disagrees with the government's report, saying that institutional racism exists. It's the lived experience of millions of black and ethnic minority workers. They went on to describe the report as deeply cynical and as completely immoral for ignoring black and ethnic minority workers. Let's move on to crime and policing, an area which the report dedicates a huge 60 pages. Despite this focus on the matter, nearly all of the attention is put on policing, with them broadly supporting the current police tactics, including stop and search, while acknowledging that the strategy can lead to targeting minority young people for minor offences. More notable than their support of police tactics is the lack of focus on racial injustice in courts and the criminal system more generally, something that critics have made a big deal of. This is a fairly big omission and means that the report doesn't address some major concerns, like the fact that black people are 9 times more likely to be imprisoned than white people. One area where the report does encourage change, though, is recommending that forces in England and Wales diversify to better represent the communities they're working in. Health is another major sector of the report, with them suggesting the creation of the Office for Health Disparities to better consider how health outcomes and life expectancies are impacted by race. When it comes to education, the report's outlook is glowing, praising how much progress has been made regarding attainment for minority students. It emphasises how many minority students largely perform as well or better than their white classmates, with the exception of black Caribbeans who do worse, something that the report suggests needs further attention. Some have criticised this rosy outlook, pointing out the sheer number of racist incidents in schools, with a Guardian report finding over 60,000 racist incidents in schools in the last 5 years, a number which likely undercounts the reality. Also regarding schools, the report touched on campaigners' efforts to increase focus on Britain's colonial past in history lessons, with campaigners accusing the current curriculum of largely overlooking the horrors of slavery and forgiving Britain's, at time, brutal history. The report remarks that the curriculum should include the Caribbean experience, which speaks to the slave period not only being about profit and suffering, but how culturally African people transformed themselves into a remodeled African Britain. Many aren't happy with this tone though, and say that the report handled this section especially badly, with Halema Begum of the Runnymede Trust quipping, "I am absolutely flabbergasted to see the slave trade apparently redefined as the Caribbean experience, as if it's something that Thomas Cook should be selling, a one-way shackled cruise to purgatory." The cultural deafness of this report is only going to become clearer in the coming days and weeks. Then finally comes the issue of institutional racism. For anyone who's not aware, institutional racism is the idea that society's structures and systems are inherently racist and put minority groups at a disadvantage. This touches on all of the issues we've already discussed, including claims that education, law enforcement, courts and employment all have institutional issues which put minorities at an immediate disadvantage. Some expected the report to dismiss this idea in its entirety, but it didn't do that. Well, not exactly. The report does attempt to unpick the idea by saying that geography, family influence, socioeconomic background, culture and religion all have a greater impact on life chances than race, although many of these are heavily linked to race anyway. The report also suggests that institutional racism is an overused idea, arguing that its overuse in areas where there's no evidence of an inbuilt institutional bias in that context has diluted its credibility. However, it does admit that there are some cases of institutional racism, but encourages campaigners to prove them before making claims, something that many campaigners have highlighted is near impossible to do. Campaigners were also directly addressed by the report, seemingly specifically taking shots at the Black Lives Matter movement. The report recognises the idealism of those well-intentioned young people, but says that a narrative that claims that nothing has changed for the better will end up alienating the decent centre ground of all ethnicities. This brings us to the core of the report's controversy for many people. Many of those in the commission who wrote this report grew up in the 70s, 80s and earlier, and they were clearly keen to highlight how much has improved since then. The problem is that campaigners say that this misses the broader point. To them, even if things have changed for the better in the last 50 years, that doesn't mean that things are good enough or that the fight is over. As such, the report has repeatedly been accused of being tone deaf and completely missing the mark. Labour responded negatively to the report too, with the Shadow Women and Equality Secretary remarking that it's clearly wrong to downplay institutional racism in a pandemic where Black, Asian and minority ethnic people have died disproportionately and are now twice as likely to be unemployed as a result. She went on to remark that the government must urgently explain how they came to publish content which glorifies the slave trade and immediately disassociate themselves with these remarks. Labour's David Lammy took a similar tone, tweeting that Britain's black community was being gaslighted, going on to say that he's tired of the endless debate about whether structural racism exists with little desire to actually address it. So it seems that rather than unifying anyone, the report has actually created more division. Those supporting the government are likely to back the report and believe that institutional racism isn't a genuine issue due to the major progress made, while those on the other side will conclude that this is the move of a cynical government, attempting to downplay a very serious issue. What do you think though? Is this report reflective of life in modern Britain, or is it a conservative excuse not to do more? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.